In this episode, we talk about confirmation bias and we try to understand why is it so important to understand. Let's get into it. All right, let's get into confirmation bias. Now, what exactly is confirmation bias? I think, very simply put, it is this tendency of our minds to favor information or data which confirms our already existing notions or opinions about something. And this is something that you can see in your day to day lives. In fact, whenever I'm talking about confirmation bias, I'm always reminded of this section of Thinking Fast and Slow. I think the author was talking about confirmation bias there when he put in an anecdote from this comedian Danny Kaye. And he says that in one of his routines, Danny Kaye was talking about a woman that he disliked. And he says about her, he says, her favorite position was beside herself, and her favorite sport was jumping to conclusions. That is exactly how confirmation bias works. You always want to be by yourself because you already know everything. And you're always very quick to jump to conclusions because, again, you already know everything, right? And this is something that is quite hilarious, right? So, I think confirmation bias can be seen in your day-to-day lives very easily. In this current day and age, it's very easily seen in how we search for new information. For example, if you're someone who is a left-leaning person and all you do is Google um, things that will confirm leftist politics, or that will confirm how rightist politics are bad or whatnot, or if you follow content creators and influencers who are always pushing out left-leaning content, it is only going to lead, this entire machinery is always going to lead you to the same conclusions that you're already drawn, right? And this works both ways. This works for a person who's right leaning too, correct? Which brings me to my second point. Even apart from information that you're searching, it's also about information and how it's interpreted. Because even if you're consuming content from very different sources, but if your conclusions are always the same about everything, that should give you an indication that maybe you're falling prey to your preconceived notions, correct? And number three, this is a very important one. An indication of confirmation bias can be seen in how your memory serves you. And our memories are quite tricky. Our memories may make us feel as if we actually remember what happened or what was said or whatever the entire situation was. But when we're remembering something, it's just that we're remembering it. That is what we remember from it. And what we remember from any situation, from any conversation we have, is colored by our present situation. It's colored by our conclusions that we drew from that conversation or from that situation, etc. So, if your memories are always serving you things that confirm what you already want to be true, it's most likely not true, right? It's most likely that you are falling prey to confirmation bias again. Now, I think it's also important to understand that confirmation bias is a very tricky one, because how do you really know whether you're falling prey to a bias or whether you're being actually right? I think it's a tricky one because it's completely gray area. There is no black and white here. But I still feel that I've noted down a few indicators that can really help you think better and deeper into whether you're falling prey to a bias or whether you're being actually right. You know, now the number one indicator of falling prey to a bias, to the confirmation bias, is that you're spontaneously always able to pick a side. Every time there's any conversation about, let's say, your favorite topics, let's talk about politics. Every time there's a conversation about politics, if you can spontaneously pick a side about every single issue, it should tell you that you've already formed this opinion in your mind, right? You're not even trying to listen to the other person and the other side. And it's most likely that you need to listen better and you need to think about thinking better, right? Then, second, this is a very important one, the inability to call a spade a spade. What do I mean by that? This is something you would have seen very commonly in people who are very, let's say, very emotional about any topic. If they find a bad example, that is kind of contradicting their position, they call it that, a bad example, and they move on. But if the other side, if the other side has a bad example, that is not just a bad example. That for them confirms what the entire side is all about, right? This is what I mean by the inability to call a spade a spade. If you can never see where you are wrong, if you can never see that the other side can also have just a few bad apples, it could be a similar case with regards to your own side, you're falling prey to the confirmation bias again. And another indicator that I can say is the ability to very often say things like, yeah, so what? Yeah, I know that. No, it's nothing new, right? So, if, see, I do not mean that these responses are always uncalled for, but if before even listening to the other side, this is your first reaction, yeah, this is nothing new, I already know this, etc. Of course, you're falling prey to confirmation bias, because if you never hear anything new from the other side, that actually does mean that you've already formed opinions and they're kind of unshakable now, which means they need to be shaken now. Now, all said and done, I still think that confirmation bias is an absolutely tricky cognitive bias, because it's not that you can completely eliminate it. It's not that I'm sitting on a high horse right now talking to all of you and saying that you are all biased and I'm not. Confirmation bias is an underlying, let's say, a mechanism how our minds work. I think it is kind of a derivative of our evolutionary processes trying to optimize for thinking faster. You know, if I fall into a situation that I'm familiar with, I can make quicker decisions. And it serves you. For example, if there's a noise coming from your car and you've been in a familiar position, you know when to stop the car or whether to keep going, right? It's not just a case of confirmation bias, but this quick thinking can also come back to bite you in all the numerous examples that we talked about in this episode, right? So I think the number one advice that worked for me, it has been working really well for the past few years for me, has been, it's a very general one. Just try to be more still, you know, and just try to bring more awareness into how you're thinking, why you're thinking it, what you are thinking. Because if you're still, if you're not overwhelmed by the situation, by the emotions surrounding that situation, you can actually take better decisions. And I think this is something that no one really disputes, because the moment the situation gets a hold of you, the moment your emotions overwhelm you, you can almost you can almost certify that you will not be taking your best decisions right now, and therefore it's kind of time to slow down, right? So this is one advice I would definitely give out. If you are not still, if you're not being calm, try to not take any decision, try to not form any conclusion, or at least a major conclusion. I have open on my screen right now a beautiful quote from this Russian author, Ospensky. He says, I found that the chief difficulty for most people was to realize that they had heard new things. That is, things they had never heard before. They kept translating what they heard into their own habitual language. Now tell me if this is not true for our present day and age. On social media, all of the echo chambers that are surrounding our social media feeds, are all of the algorithms that are powering all of them, you can see that if you subscribe to a particular opinion, what you see mostly is either other things that also subscribe or throw that opinion into a positive light, or you see a mockery of the opposing opinion, right? And if that doesn't lead to a confirmation bias, I don't know what will. So I think that is why it is extremely important in this day and age to understand about confirmation bias, amongst all other cognitive biases too, of course, because I don't think the internet is going away anytime soon. Our future selves, our kids, future generations, everyone is going to be using either the same tools or tools similar to this one. And our own thinking is kind of lacking right now to handle all the bandwidth of whatever information is thrown at us. So we need to step up our own games. And the number one way to do that is to become more aware of how our own thinking actually works, right? So, on that note, If you want to listen to more of my episodes about cognitive biases, I do a dedicated section of them on my podcast. You can go on to my website www.chetannarang.org and search for cognitive biases in the episode playlists. Again, that's www.chetannarang.org. And on that note, I think I have covered pretty much everything that I wanted to in this episode. And I think I'll see you in the next one. Until next time, peace out.